So you're ready for the second day of school? Okay. Chapter 6 in the book is Good Teachers Create a Caring Community. I know when I first discovered that there was such a thing as a character education movement, and I started hearing some of the terms they use, this was always my favorite one, and it still is, a caring community. You know, I think our homes need to be caring communities, and obviously our churches are places of worship. And I think our schools should be caring communities too. And I wanted my classroom to be a caring community. So let me explain some of the things I did on the second day of the school year. Now, Dr. Tom Lacona was mentioned earlier. His picture was up here on the screen. He's one of my closest friends. In fact, the sale of the book that you bought, a portion of the profit goes to the Center for the Fourth and Fifth R's in New York. The R's are respect and responsibility. And I'm always happy to do that because Dr. Lacona got me involved in this. And he wrote what we call the flagship book of the character education movement. It's called Educating for Character, How Our Schools Can Teach Respect and Responsibility. I want to give you a quotation from that book. He says, kids need caring attachments to adults and to each other. And I think sometimes as teachers we forget that they need to have good relationships and close attachments to each other in addition to us. And so that's what we mean by a caring community. Now, I don't know if the word cheers means anything to you. We all know what it means to, sometimes I sign an email and I put cheers, you know, be of good cheer. But we had a television program in the United States back in the 1980s, I think it was, and that was the name of the television program. It was called Cheers. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it in here before or not, but I'll tell you what it was about. Cheers was the name of a bar. You do have bars in Manila, right? Okay, Cheers was the name of a bar in Boston, Massachusetts, and these real good friends and funny guys, they hung out there, and they always had a really good time. And it was a very, very funny show. It was very popular. I watched it with my sons. And at the beginning of the show, they had a song. Now, I can't sing this for you. I'll tell you why. I think I told you I went to Catholic school. And in the second grade, a nun gave me the only D that I've ever had in my life. And she gave it to me in singing. And my mother was very upset. She did not like seeing a D on my report card. And so we went in together to talk to this nun. And she said, you gave my son a D. She said, does he try hard? And the nun said, yes, he tries, but he just can't sing. And my mother thought that was wrong, but she didn't win. I ended up with a D. And you know what order of nuns they were? The Sisters of Mercy. Okay, anyway, and I'm not making fun of them because I learned many great things from them. But anyway, at the beginning of the program, they would sing this song, and they were all friends and they had good relationships and so on. You want to go where everybody knows your name and they're always glad you came. That's what I wanted in my classroom. I wanted my students to come in and be glad that they came there because everybody was happy to see them. Not just me. I encouraged them to greet each other if they hadn't already seen each other that day. And so that's the type of atmosphere that I wanted to create. Now it says here, it says a cheers atmosphere. A place where everyone knows your name and a lot more. Now I don't have time to go into detail, but I know a lot of you have the book and you will find these things explained in the book. The first thing was a 2-minute interview. I must have worked on that 2-minute interview for about 7 or 8 years before I finally got it to the point where it worked just the way I wanted it to work. The students, very often in high school, they come to school, and on the first day of school, they don't even know each other. They've never had classes together before, and so they come, and I want them to know each other, because that's the way you build a caring community. So I gave them 2 minutes to interview each other, and I had a little sheet of paper that they had with them. There's a copy of it in the book, and they found out 5 interesting things about their new classmate in less than 2 minutes, and it worked very well. And they interviewed everybody, and they interviewed me, and I interviewed all the students, and we just did it a little bit at a time for about the first 3 weeks of the school year, but we started it on the second day. Then the personal info sheet was 40 questions, and there was 40 questions about the student, and they loved answering them because every one of them was about them. And basically I'm saying, I want to know about your life. You don't have to answer some of these if you don't want to, but please tell me, you know, what your favorite things are and your family, about your family and all of this type of thing. And then at the end I had a question that says, is there anything else you would like me to know about you? And they thought it was good that I took an interest in them. Now the last one on there, I call it musical chairs, because musical chairs is a game where kids they're playing music and they're in seats and they keep getting up and changing seats. Okay, that's what my students call this musical chairs. Now, do you remember when Dr. Jones earlier drew a diagram of a classroom, and he said all of those desks, the way the custodian set it up? Well, I was glad to hear him talk about that, because I want to explain to you the way I had mine set up, and there is a diagram in the book of it. But if I was now in the front of the room right here, I had a section of seats here, and I had a section of seats here, and I had a section of seats here. So I had this big space in the middle. And you know how he mentioned if somebody's goofing off, they don't do it if you're close to them? So let's say I'm talking to my class and there's some goofing off going over here in the corner. I just keep talking and start walking this way, and the closer I get, the sooner it's going to stop. Okay, and so that was a way. And then the other thing I did, the reason it's called musical chairs, is because each seat had a little number on it. And if you were sitting in seat number 1 today, you were going to sit in seat number 2 tomorrow, but seat number 1 could be over here and seat number 2 could be over here. That way, if I just said to the students, I want everybody to change seats, they have their little cliques, their little groups, and they go, okay, we'll sit here today and we'll sit here tomorrow. No, it doesn't work that way. They're all going to go in different directions. And they told me at the beginning, I don't like that. I want to sit with my friends. And I said, no, I don't want to have cliques in my classroom. I want you to meet everybody else, and we're all going to be friends and support each other. And then after about 3 weeks, they told Mr. Urban, I'm so glad you did that. This is so much better. Okay, so anyway, it's all explained. And when we got through those things, the atmosphere changed. People they really got to know each other. So here's my number 1 goal for the year: to create a culture of caring and excellence. They care about each other. The excellence is the academic standards that I have. These things follow in order. Students know each other. They get to know each other first. Then they begin to understand each other. See, I taught in a school that had kids of all different races. Actually, the largest group in my school was what we call Hispanic. Most of them from Mexico, some of them from Central America. About 41% of our student body was Hispanic. And then we had about 39% white or Anglo. We had about 12% black kids, which they now call African Americans. We had Tongans, we had Samoans, and we had some Asians. Most of them were from Vietnam. So we had a real mix, and these kids come from different cultures, and they got to know each other and understand each other. And when they do that, they begin to care about each other, and then they begin to support each other. Okay, now, I do a real lot on the power of words. And tomorrow, I'm going to build on this particular section. I'm going to talk about words today, and then tomorrow I'm going to talk about how I taught kids to use what I call build-up language instead of tear-down language. Okay, but I'm going to give you some basic things of what I did in the classroom. It says, good teachers protect the atmosphere from toxic words. All right, now I think probably everybody knows what toxic means, but I want to explain to you how I did this with my, oh no, not again, okay. I went up to the chalkboard and I wrote toxic. And I asked my students, I said, does everybody know what that word means? Most of them did. Some of them were not sure. And whenever you use a word, you want to make sure your kids know what you're talking about. So I always had a dictionary in the room. We always made sure we were clear. And so we all agreed that this is poison. Toxic, poison, damaging, harmful, whatever, but toxic. Okay, so they all know that. Now I write another word on the board, and it's called nourishing. Fewer of the kids knew what nourishing meant. Many of them did know what it means, but we all agreed that nourishing means it promotes and stimulates growth. All right, so you nourish a baby. What do? You give it a lot of love, you feed it, you keep it clean and warm, and so on. You nourish that baby. You even nourish a plant. You give the plant sunlight, you give it water, you give it fertilizer, you help it grow. Okay, and so that's the kind of atmosphere. See at the top it says choosing an atmosphere. And I told my students one of the ways you choose an atmosphere is by the words that you put into that atmosphere. Are they going to be toxic words or are they going to be nourishing words? Okay, now let me go back to the word toxic. I used a lot of symbols and visible reminders while I was teaching. And one of them looked like this. Okay, I know because I've already been told in the Philippines they do sell a product called Lysol, right? You spray it and it makes things smell better. Okay, well this was a Lysol can. It was empty. And I cut a piece of paper that I could wrap around that Lysol can. And in the old days, the art teacher would draw skull and crossbones for me, and then I would write poison, and in the more modern days, I would go to the computer and I would Google skull and crossbones, and I would pick the one I wanted. I liked this one because he had the nicest smile. And then I wrote poison, and so I would use a physical, a visible symbol with the kids, and I would hold this up and I would say, when you use foul words, mean words, toxic words, it's like spraying poison in the atmosphere of the classroom. Now, please don't go buy a Lysol can and spray kids with it if they say something bad. I did have a teacher do that one time. She was spraying kids in her class with Lysol, and she got in trouble because the kids went home and told their parents. The parents called the principal called her in and said, what in the world are you doing spraying kids with Lysol? And she said, well, I went to a conference and this guy, Dr. Urban, was speaking and he won all kinds of teaching awards and he used to spray his kids with Lysol and he told us to do that. Well, she wasn't paying attention. And he called me all the way from New Jersey, all the way across the United States. He says, what are you telling teachers to do? And I said, it was empty. It was empty. It was just a symbol. So make sure you heard that, right? You're not going to go spray anybody with Lysol. Okay. Now, back up to the chalkboard, and I've got the word toxic on one side and nourishing on the other side, and I asked the students a question. What do you not want to hear? By the way, this is something that you can do in families. If you have children especially, you say, we're going to make a list of the things we do not want to hear in our family. And then things, of course, that we do want to hear. But anyway, on the chalkboard, I had toxic on one side and I had nourishing on the other side. And so the first thing we did was the students would tell me what they did not want to hear, and we would make a list. Now, sometimes the list was 7 or 8 things. They would say, I don't want somebody to put me down, which means make them feel bad, criticize them, laugh at them, so on. We don't want to hear complaining. We don't want to hear filthy words. We don't want to hear bragging. And so sometimes they'd come up with 6 things. Sometimes they'd come up with 12 things. And back in 1998, I had a class that really took this seriously, and they wanted to get a really good list of words. And they did. They came up with 30 of them. And so we gave them a nickname. We called them the Dirty 30. And this is my advice. Keep them out of the classroom and the hallways and off the campus. And the kids, they bought into it. See up at the top it says the No Poison Pledge. They signed a little agreement that they would not use any of the Dirty 30 while they were a student in my class. And it made a real difference. Okay. Now, let me give you an example of how I reminded the kids not to spray poison in the atmosphere of my classroom. Okay, my classroom was an average size, and it was square, and the clock in that room was not right up in front of me here. It was over on this wall up high, but it was near the front of the room. So I said to the kids, I said, please notice where the clock is, because I had a lot of things on my walls. And I said, you notice that there's space around the clock. I said, when you come in tomorrow, now that we've talked about toxic words, I said, the clock will have some signs around it to remind you to not spray poison in the atmosphere of the classroom. Now, do you understand why I put these signs around the clock? Where do they look the most during class? At the clock, thinking it's not working. They want it to go faster, right? So anyway, this is what they saw when they came in the next day. That's the first sign that they saw. No complaining. Did you know that that's the number one way that kids poison the atmosphere of a classroom? Did you know that? Complaining. Do you know the number one way that teachers poison the atmosphere of a classroom? Complaining. Teachers complain more than they think they do. All right, now, the next sign, you should already know what it is. What always comes with complaining? Anybody? What always comes with complaining? It's an ugly sound. Yeah, I heard a number of people say it. Whining. It's hard to complain without whining, especially if you're a kid. Okay, now there's another sound that goes with complaining. Moaning and groaning. You know, kids are so much in the habit of complaining that I read someplace at home, or some expert on language, he said most kids can complain, whine, moan, and groan all in the same sentence. And they can do that by the time they're in the third grade because they're so used to doing it. And teachers don't do anything in a positive way to try to eliminate complaining and whining from their classroom. So I'm going to share with you some things I did. Okay, another one was put downs. That I hope it's not as bad here in the Philippines, but kids just think that it's so important for them to verbally put down other kids, make other kids feel bad, to tease them, to make fun of them, to point out things that are wrong with them, and things like that. And it's just horrible. And I didn't ever want anybody to come into my classroom and think that anybody else was going to put them down in that classroom. And all the kids agreed with me. That's not a good thing. And that was one of the things they agreed they would not do. Okay, swearing is another one. I talked a little bit about that later, and I explained in the book how I dealt with that issue. And then the last one is gossip. And that's probably the hardest one because everybody, unfortunately, does like to gossip. And I said you can gossip, but it can only be good gossip. You can talk about people only if you say good things about them, but don't say bad things behind people's back. Okay. The no poison pledge, the terrible two, eliminate them early. Now I do know, because I've spoken in Asia so many times, I do know these things are universal. They go on all over the world. They go on in all 50 of the United States. Okay, so I just want to give you an example of how I change toxic language to nourishing language. Okay, here are the terrible two. As teachers, have you ever had a student ask you a question and the first four words are, do we have to? Do we have to? Do we have to do homework tonight? Have you ever had questions like that? Do we have to? Now, you remember earlier I said we communicate in three ways: words, body language, and tone of voice. Now, when a kid asks you if there's homework tomorrow, does the kid come up to you and say, "Do we have to do homework tonight?" Do they smile and say that in a pleasant way? Okay. Now, if you put it in writing, what it sounds like, it would come out like this. But since I'm here and I can do it, I'm sure this sounds more familiar to you. "Do we have to do homework tonight?" Now, isn't that poison in the atmosphere of the class? It is. That is such an unpleasant sound, and then that ugly look on the face. So I want to have some fun with it, and I want to teach the kid who said that and the other kids, we're going to change that from toxic to nourishing. Okay, so the first thing I do is when a kid asks that, I go over and I get my can and I hold it up. And I say, "Oh, look what happened. We've had a little accident. Some poison leaked out of my can." I said, "Now it's okay. It's early in the year. People make these mistakes, but I'm trying to teach you the difference between toxic and nourishing." So I said, "Let's change this from toxic to nourishing." Okay, I said, "First of all, let me explain to you about homework. My homework assignment is not a very long one, but it's pretty easy. It had to do with current events. It will help you become better informed. It will earn you good grade points and a higher grade. You'll have the opportunity to talk to other well-informed people, and you'll be able to carry on a conversation with them." And I said, "It's so fantastic." I said, "You should be begging me for homework. But don't say, 'Do we have to do homework tonight?'" I said, "This is what you say. You change your tone of voice, you change your body language, and you say, 'Mr. Urban, do we get to do homework tonight?'" And they act like they're excited. They laugh about it because it's phony, but they get a kick out of it. And I train them into asking about that. And then I say, "You should be begging for homework." So that's one of them. Let me give you one other example. Have you ever heard kids say these two short words in your classes? Okay. They usually say these when you make an announcement. A test is coming. An assignment is coming. Something, work. Okay. They think work is a dirty word. Okay. So you make your announcement, and they don't look at you and smile and go, "Oh, no. No." You know, you're more familiar with it. They go, "Oh, no." All right, now let me tell you in my teaching experience when I knew they were going to do it, so I was going to be proactive. I told you earlier I handed out a lot of pages and I numbered them. Okay, early in the school year, the kids don't know me very well yet, and I hand out a paper and it's still in my hand. And a student is about to get it. He has not seen it. He doesn't know what's on it, but he's conditioned that in high school a handout means work. It means you might have to read. You might have to write. You might even have to think. Okay, and so it's still in my hand and the kid goes, "Oh, no." Well, nobody else has even seen the paper. The whole classroom has been poisoned. And I go like this, I go, oh, and I take it back and I put it over on my desk. And I say, "Now it's okay, it's okay. It always happens at the beginning of the year." I get my can and I hold it up and I said, "It's just a little accident." I said, "We got some poison in a room." I said, "But I'm going to teach you how we're going to nourish the room instead of poisoning the atmosphere of the class." Okay, so what I do is I give them a big sales pitch on how good my handouts are. I said, "These are the best handouts ever." I said, "They're way better than a textbook. They're easier to carry. They're easier to understand. And they're more fun." And I said, "My handouts are so awesome. You should be cheering when I give handouts." I said, "Now, when I give a handout, I don't want somebody to go, 'Oh, no.' I said, this is what I want you to do when you get a handout and you get the piece of paper and you go, 'Oh boy, This looks like it'll be a wonderful learning experience. Now, can you imagine a kid saying that? But they thought it was so funny to say that they would do it all of the time, and then they would always laugh. That went on every day. And you know, I'm going to talk later about when we wrote the rules together, and we write the things you're encouraged to do and the things you're not allowed to do. And they wrote in the rules, it was my last year of teaching, they wrote on the positive side, they wrote, cheer when you get handouts. And so my last year of teaching, instead of coming out with a group of papers and going like this, handing them out to kids, I would come out and I would hold them up in my hand. And I would go, look what I have. And they would go, yeah, handouts. And I would say, and who wants the first one? And whoever got the first one would go, oh boy, another great learning experience. And we changed the atmosphere of the classroom. Now it may seem crazy, but it was fun, and it did in fact change the atmosphere of the class. I had a kid named David one year. He was one of my favorite students. He was actually 3 inches taller than me, and he had really long hair. It came down to here, and he wore a French beret on his head. He was just a wonderful kid, and he always wanted to come up with something clever when he got the first handout. So about once a week, he would go, oh, me, Mr. Urban, because he wanted to come up with something good, and he came up with some really good things. You know, one day he threw us all off. I said, look what I have. And they go, yeah, handouts. I said, who wants the first one? And he goes, oh, Mr. Urban, me. He said, I haven't had the first one for a week. And I said, okay, David, here you go. And he took it, and he surprised all of us. He took it and he looked at it very seriously. And he goes, and we're all waiting. And he goes, I don't know how you do it, Mr. Urban. They just keep getting better and better. I love that kid, you can imagine. Okay, now, this is one that'll hit home, I think. Okay, I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota about 12 years ago, and I didn't have this PowerPoint and that kind of stuff. I didn't have that then. And so I would hold up signs and I would describe things to them. And so when I was all done, I was up on a stage and I had a table behind me and all my signs were on it. And so one teacher, it was a man, he came up and he said, can I look at your signs? And I said, sure. So he looked at my signs, and then he had 2 of them, and he was holding them like this, but I couldn't see which 2 they were because the face was on his stomach. And so he said, hey, Hal, I've got an idea for you. He said, you say you want to help faculties become better. And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, well, I have a reason. He says, how to help every faculty in the country become better and make a lot of money while doing it. And I said, well, okay, what's your idea? So this is what he said to me. He says, take these 2 signs. Now, he's still holding them like this, and I don't know which 2 they are. He says, make them 10 times bigger. He says, then sell them to every school in the country. I'm wondering, okay. I said, well, let me see the 2 signs. This is the first one, no complaining. Okay, this is the second one, no gossip. Okay, now I asked him a question. What does the school do with them? And this is his answer. Put them in the most toxic place on campus. What is it? The most toxic place on campus. See, things are universal. It's the same in the Philippines as it is in the United States. And it shouldn't be that way. We can't ask the kids to use nourishing language if we're using toxic language among each other. One of the first things I learned in my very first year of teaching, stay out of the faculty lounge because it had a poisonous atmosphere. Okay, who did they complain about? They complained about students, and they complained about the administrators in the school. Okay? Who did they gossip about? whoever wasn't there that day. Yeah. And I didn't want to be in there. And so I went to my classroom and I ate lunch alone and I read the sports page, which I love. Do you know why I love the sports page? Because it has so much good news on it. Do you know that half the teams that played yesterday won their games? Right? And it always has good news. And you celebrate things on the sports page. You celebrate achievement. But you need to take care of that at your school. Make your faculty lounge a non-toxic place. There's a story in the book there about a school that did make two really big signs, no complaining and no gossip, and they put them up in their faculty lounge, and it was basically all coming from about 3 or 4 women, and they made the women so uncomfortable they went to someplace else to eat lunch, and it cleared out the poison out of the faculty lounge. Okay, now the other side of it is that good teachers nourish the atmosphere with kind and affirming words. Okay, so now we're talking about the opposite. What words do we use? What kinds of things do we say that nourishes the atmosphere? Okay, now I'm asking the question. Before it was, what do you not want to hear? Now it's, what do you want to hear? Okay, so we're back to the chalkboard. We've already done this. Now we're going to do this one. Tell me the things you want to hear. What do kids want to hear? They want to hear friendly greetings. They want to hear compliments. They want to hear encouragement. There's a whole bunch of things they want to hear on a daily basis. And so they gave me their list. Again, it would be somewhere between 6 and 12 things. The group I had in 1998, they felt the need, since they had given me the dirty 30, they wanted to give me 30 positive ones. So we called those the thoughtful 30. Teach them, use them, get the staff to use them, and get the kids to use them. It makes an enormous difference. It nourishes the atmosphere. Okay, in fact, I signed a copy of this today. It's probably for sale somewhere in the Philippines, but I know it's easy access. It's been out for a long time. My first book was written in 1990, and it was called Life's Greatest Lessons. And I had a chapter in it about the power of positive words. It's called Kind Words Cost Little But Accomplish Much. And I knew when I finished the book that I wanted to write more about that subject, and that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. So I expanded that chapter into an entire book, and it's called Positive Words, Powerful Results, Simple Ways to Honor, Affirm, and Celebrate Life. And I think that's what our words should do. I'm going to talk to you tomorrow about a man that became one of my best friends. He was a fellow teacher, and he was the one that helped me increase my awareness of the power of our words, especially positive words. Okay, now, this is along the same line. Good teachers start every class with something positive. Now, this is a continuation of nourishing words, okay? I had, among the signs in my room, I had one that was yellow, and it said, "Celebrate today." It was about this big. And I put it in a strategic place in the classroom. Whenever I started class, I went to the front where the board was, and I stood right in the middle. So I would stand right here, and that sign was directly above my head. So I greeted them at the door and welcomed them in. I took attendance, which took about 15 seconds. And then I would go stand under that sign, and I would point to it and smile, and I would say, "And please tell me, what are we celebrating today?" And here are the choices they had. Now, this is something that developed over the years. It started off with only one thing. We would share good news. But then it evolved, and we ended up with 4 things. Okay, so these are the choices that they had. If anybody had good news, they could share that, and they loved to share their good news. If I had good news, I would share the good news. I heard things like, as personal as my mother and father have been separated for 3 years, they got back together. And that was wonderful news to celebrate. My oldest sister just had her first baby. I'm now an aunt. That was good news. Sometimes it would be, we won the football game last Friday night. This is on a Monday, and that's good news. And it just went on and on about good news, and they loved sharing it, and it was a very positive thing. It was nourishing the atmosphere. Okay, the second one is you just complete this sentence. I'm thankful for. In my first book, Life's Greatest Lessons, I have a chapter about being thankful. That was the greatest thing that my mother taught me, to always be thankful. And I used to complain like most little kids about things I didn't have. And she said to me, the happiest people in the world aren't the people who have everything. The happiest people in the world who are the ones who are thankful for what they do have. And she taught me to be thankful. And so you just completed this sentence, I'm thankful for. It could be a person, it could be a thing, it could be an intangible. But we have a lot of things to be thankful for. And the kids used to tell me that's a great reminder that we take too many things for granted. We have so many people and things that we should be thankful for. Now the third one, it says kind words. That means you say something kind and affirming about somebody else in the classroom. There was one restriction on that one. It could not be about something physical. In other words, some teenage boy is not going to look at some good-looking girl and say, man, you are really hot. Okay, that may be a compliment, it may not, but you're not going to say that because that's about physical. I don't want one girl to say about another girl, I love your hairdo. That's physical. I wanted them to look for the good in each other and to point out things that they admire and appreciate about other people. And what I'm going to do tomorrow is explain to you how that happened and how I taught kids to use, as I said before, build-up language instead of tear-down language. And then the last one is funny things. They had options here. The goal was to make the class laugh. I've got a chapter later that says good teachers laugh with their students. Kids love to laugh. And so I figured if I could get a couple of laughs every day before we start class, it's healthy and it relaxes people. And they could tell a story, they could tell a joke, or they could just do something stupid and funny, as long as they made people laugh. And we only took about 3 or 4 minutes to do this. I explain in the book how I got everybody involved. It wasn't just the same kids every day. We took turns doing it, and they came up with some marvelous things. And again, I was told many, many times that I was the only teacher that greeted kids at the door. I was the only teacher that started every class with something positive and fun, okay? All right, now good teachers use the power of visible reminders. You've already seen a whole bunch of them. The first one I showed you was my can. Okay, then you saw the 6 signs that went around the clock. And then you saw the Celebrate Today sign. So those are examples of visible reminders. Kids see them every day, and it reminds them about things that I've gone over with them. Let me show you a couple of other things they saw in my classroom. My students did this one, and it was pretty big. I would say it was about that big. And it was kids that really thought the manners and the golden rule thing was very good for the atmosphere of the class, and a lot of them had never heard of the golden rule before. You know, treat other people the way you would like them to treat you. And they thought that was really fantastic. And we talked about, well, people preach it, but do they practice it? And are we going to practice it in this classroom, in this community? And so they made a big poster, and it says, this is a golden rule classroom. We practice what we preach. And it was a daily reminder up in the front of the room. In fact, if somebody ever slipped, one of the kids would poke them and just go like this and point to the sign. We practice what we preach. Okay, this is another sign they saw in my room. I used to always challenge my students to give the best they were capable of giving. I remember I asked them one day, I said, do you give your best in all your classes? And almost all of them said no. And I said, why not? And then, you know, all kinds of phony reasons why not to. And I said, well, how would you feel about me if I didn't give you my best every day? because I said, I come here every day, I'm going to give you the very best I have. And they said, oh, well, you get paid. Okay, but do I get paid to give my best, or do I get paid to do my job? There's a difference. And I said, I couldn't live with myself if I did not give you the very best I have. I don't get more pay for giving you my best. I said, my pay is going to be the same. My pay is going to be the same as the laziest teacher in the school. And of course, they then wanted to inform me who that teacher was, and I said, no, I don't want to hear it. Okay. But they understood that. And I said, all I'm asking you to is, you're here for 50 minutes, give me the best you have. And give your classmates the best you have in terms of the way we treat each other, and make an effort to learn. And I will, and I guaranteed them, there's a thing in the book it says about mission statements, and I guaranteed them that I would always give them the very best I had. Okay, I had 3 signs, one on top of each other, because I talked about manners, and I want to show you those 3 signs. This was the first one. No one ever went wrong by being polite. In the history of the world, no one ever went wrong by being polite. No put-downs. Compliments spoken here. So we had no put-down signs. There was one up around the clock. It just said no put-downs, and then we had the other one that said no put-downs, compliments spoken here. And the last one says no discounts, everyone counts. I want to tell you what a discount is in case you've never heard of that before. A discount is when you treat somebody as if he or she does not exist. You don't listen to them, you ignore them, you act like they're worth nothing. And I always tell the kids that discounting somebody is worse than a put down, because it makes them feel like nothing, and that's the worst thing you can feel like, is nothing. And I said, I don't want anybody to ever discount anybody. That's why we listen to each other. When kids had something to say, everybody else was listening. Okay, 2 of my favorite words here. And I had lessons around them, and I think I explained them in the book, but I love the word opportunity. It was built around the idea, is school an obligation? Is it something that you have to go to? Do you get up in the morning and say, I have to go to school? Or is it an opportunity to be with your friends and teachers who care about you, and to learn things that are going to help you lead a better life? And I said, view life and view school as an opportunity. This is one of my favorite words, is possibilities. I said, do you think in terms of why you cannot do things, about hardships, about roadblocks and things like that, or do you think in terms of possibilities? I remember when the Hispanic kids first started coming to our school. A lot of them said, I'll never be able to go to college because my parents are poor, and because they're not educated. And I said, are you thinking in terms of possibilities? And they said, what do you mean? And I said, explore what's possible for you if you work hard, if you have good social skills, you're nice to people, and you get good grades. There's a thing out there called a scholarship. And you can get those scholarships, and it will pay your way through college. And we saw those Hispanic kids get better and better after they had come to our school. And that's because they began to understand that if they thought in terms of possibilities, that they could do wondrous things with their lives. This is the only sign that I didn't make myself. I had a saying in my classroom, and I would say there's no parking in the comfort zone. I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but we all live in certain comfort zones. We have a personality, and certain things are easy for us to do, and it gets a little uncomfortable when we step outside our comfort zone. But we don't make any progress if we don't step outside our comfort zone. I remember when I started speaking, I used handouts and things I would hold up for a long time, and then this stuff came along, and technology terrifies me. And it was a long time before I finally realized I need to make a better presentation. And so I paid some guy to come to my home, and he showed me how to operate this program. And then finally, I realized I had taken some steps outside my comfort zone. That was the only way I was going to make any progress. And that's true of many things in life. Okay, number 12. Good teachers help their students to both own and honor the rules. Now, I want to tell you when I did this. I did it on the first day of the second week of school. That means I went through the whole first week, 5 days. I never once talked about rules. I'm going to build a community in that first week. And we weren't having any problems, so there was no need for me to pass out the rules. I remember my principal used to always say, "You're supposed to turn your rules in the first week." And I said, "I'm sorry, I'll turn them in next week. I don't want to deal with rules on the first week of the school year." And so I did something very simple. I learned it from somebody else, and it always worked. Okay, now this I decided on my own, and then I'll share with you the part that I learned from somebody else. I learned early in my teaching career that most kids think strict and mean the same thing. Do they? No, they don't. But I'll tell you how the kids associate them. My first year of teaching, a girl I had a good relationship with, she came and she asked me if she could do something. And I can't even remember specifically what it was that she asked me, but I do remember it was against the rules. And I looked at her and I said, "No, you can't do that." And she said, "You're mean." I said, "No, I'm not mean, but those are the rules. I'm strict." "Same thing." "No, they're not." And then I started hearing that more times. And every time you tell a kid, "No, you can't do that," it's, "You're mean." So I want to be proactive now. I want to address it before it happens. So I go to the chalkboard and I write these 2 words on the board and I say, do they mean the same or are they different? Some kids said it was the same. Some kids said, no, they're a little bit different. And I said, okay, let's establish what they are. And so the first one, I said, what does strict mean to you? And so they had different notions. I got my dictionary and I said, here's what it says in the dictionary: close adherence to the rules. Obey the rules, follow the rules. That's what it means, strict. All right, I said, now, let's look at the word mean. What does that mean? Well, that means when you're hurtful to somebody else, when you're cruel. I said, now, that's not the same as strict. And I said, this is my way of telling you, I am strict. Once we write the rules, those rules will be honored. But I'm not mean. And so when I tell you you can't do something, or you need to stop doing something, don't tell me I'm mean. Say, Mr. Urban, you're strict, and I will say thank you. I want to be known as a strict teacher. You can be strict and loving at the same time. That's very, very important for us to understand. Parents need to be strict, but they need to be loving at the same time. Too often people are strict and mean at the same time. So anyway, that was the first thing, the first way I introduced it. Now I want to share with you a lesson I learned from one of my personal heroes. His name is Dr. William Glasser. I think Dr. Glasser is probably in his late 80s right now. He was doing speaking for many, many years, but he's in failing health. But he was a brilliant psychoanalyst, a psychiatrist. And he wrote some books that had a big influence on me. And then he got very interested in education, and he wrote a book back in the late 60s called Schools Without Failure, and he talked about what kids' needs are and what we needed to do. And he was real good on classroom management. So I got to go to a workshop conducted by Dr. Glasser in San Diego, California, and it was an all-day thing. And this is what I remember the most, and it worked like magic. He said, if you want the kids to honor the rules, give them some ownership in the rules. And he said there are different ways to do it. And what I decided to do was that the kids and I would write the rules together, so they would have some ownership in the rules. And I did a very simple thing. I gave them a sheet of paper. There's a copy of it in the book. And up at the top it says, if we wrote the rules. And then the first section says, if we wrote the rules, students would not be allowed to, and there were 5 spaces there. And they were going to, in a small group, they were going to tell me 5 things that they would not allow students to do. Then the section below says if we wrote the rules, students would be encouraged to, and they would tell me 5 things they would want students to do in a positive way. And so they all worked in their small groups and shared ideas with each other, and then we had a big discussion about it. And so everybody knew at the end of the discussion what was going to be on the rules. And then that night, I took all these pages home and I got them all into two lists, the do's and the don'ts. I think I have, the do's and the don'ts. You are not allowed to do the following. That was the first one. That was the don'ts. And then the second part was you are encouraged to do the following. And so, as I say, we had the big discussion. I took the papers home and I condensed them into one page. And then the next day I had a handout. There's a copy of it in the book. It's the one that I handed out in my last year of teaching. It's the one that says near the bottom of the you are encouraged to, it says cheer when you get handouts, okay, and things like that. And they bought into it. And so those were the rules for the year. And we lived by those rules. Now, did anybody ever break a rule? Sure. But they were easy to handle. You know, they had ownership in those rules, so they knew that they broke one, and we could handle it pretty simply. Okay. I think this section, because it's fairly long, I'm going to skip it because I was told I need to get you out of here by 6:30 tonight. No, just kidding. I want to see if you're still awake. 4:30, and that gives me about 20 minutes. So I'm going to skip the choice section. I like talking about it, but I would need probably an all-day workshop to go over that. So I'm going to zip through some of these and then try to finish up in the last 20 minutes, okay? You getting a headache yet? Okay. This is the lighter side. Remember I said I had a chapter that says, good teachers laugh with their students. Well, I'm not a naturally funny person, but I can tell pretty good stories, and sometimes they're funny, and I also collect humor. And there's a certain type of humor that is my favorite type, and I call it unexpected and unintended humor. You know, sometimes little kids say things and they're not trying to be funny, but they make us laugh. That's the type of humor that I like the best. So I want to share with you some things that have occurred over my years of teaching that I've shared with the kids or they came from the kids. Okay, here's the first one. I taught United States history, and you may or may not know the answer to this question. If I did this in the United States, everybody would know the answer, but I'm going to help you. Okay, you have probably heard of Abraham Lincoln, yes? He was considered by historians, he was considered our greatest president, and the biggest issue that he had to deal with was slavery, and he wanted to eliminate slavery. All right, so this is during our great Civil War that we had in the 1860s. All right, I had just finished teaching these kids all about the Civil War and the greatness of Abraham Lincoln. And so this was a question on a test. The first question on the test, and it was the easiest one on the test. What was the name of the document signed by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War that was intended to end slavery in this country, meaning the U.S., forever? Now, I don't know if anybody in here has ever heard of this before. It's okay if you haven't. You know Philippine history, and I don't. I know U.S. history. Okay, now he signed a document that has two words, and they're both really long words. Anybody ever heard of it? The first word is emancipation. Do you know the second word? You got it. How'd you know that? Okay. The second word is proclamation. So that's a mouthful. Emancipation, proclamation. Emancipation means free, and proclamation means official statement. So we went over this many times, and I figure all of the kids would get the answer correct. I want to show you one of the answers that I got. He was not trying to be funny. He did pretty well. He came pretty close, didn't he? He got the first word right, and he got most of the second word right. Now, are you wondering, did I give him credit? I did. I gave him credit. I should have given him extra credit because it's provided me with a lot of laughs over the years. The emancipation constipation. Okay, here's another one. I was teaching ninth graders world history. And one of the great explorers we were studying was Ferdinand Magellan. Okay, now have you heard of him? Okay. Now, does anybody know, this question says, what was Ferdinand Magellan's most significant achievement during the age of exploration? He was the first person to do what? Anybody know? I want somebody to answer the question by using just your hand. Anybody? Okay, see all the people going like this or like this? So everybody knows, most of you. Okay, now, you may know that he died before the trip was over, but he was the leader of the first expedition that sailed all around the world. That was back in the days when the people thought if you went out too far, you'd fall off. Okay, so he proved, among other things, that the world was round. Now, do you know what we call that? It's another big word. So for kids, it's a little more difficult. Circumnavigate. He circumnavigated the world. Okay, this is the answer I got. Oh, you already know what's coming, don't you? He was the first person to circumcise the world. Man, that was a big job. Okay. Now, this one occurred right near my school. There was a church, a small church near my school. I live in a town called Redwood City. And this church is called the Redwood City Church of the Nazarene. And it had out at the end of the road one of those what we call an old-fashioned movie marquee. All right? They're big block letters. They're about this big. And you put them up by hand. We have all that stuff done electronically now, but the old movie houses, if you were old enough, you've seen them. The guys get on a ladder and they go up and they change the letters. Well, this pastor had a marquee outside, and he always had to change his message every week, and it always rhymed. So this week it said, if you're tired of sin, come on in. And it didn't make me laugh out loud, but it made me smile. I thought it was clever. And he always came up with something clever, and he made it rhyme. I drove past it about 3 days, and then somebody, I suspect in that church, who had a sense of humor, got into the box of letters and changed the sign a little bit. And this is what the sign said the next day. If you're tired of sin, come on in. If you're not, call 366-4082. Okay, that did give me a good laugh. One of my students said he called that number and nobody knew what it was about. So it was just a joke, obviously. Okay, you can find this humor anywhere. Now, I don't use the classified ads anymore. I use some service on the internet where people buy and sell things. We have a thing. Do you ever use Craigslist? Well, I use a thing called Craigslist. I give away things, I buy things, I sell things, whatever, and it's taken the place of classified ads. But many years ago, we had the classified ads in the newspaper. I had 3 little boys, and we had a dog, and the dog died. And that dog was part of our life, and I had a friend that was a dog lover, and she said, Hal, you've got to replace that dog as quickly as possible. You got to get a new dog, and so I started looking for a new dog. And I didn't want to buy one. A lot of people they give their dogs away because they're moving out of the country or something like that. And so I'm looking in the want ads for a new dog for my family. And I want to show you what one of the ads said. Doberman Pinscher, young, strong, good guard dog, eats anything, loves children. Okay? That guy was not trying to be funny. I did not get that dog. Okay, I got a different dog. I don't like Doberman Pinschers anyway. They're beautiful dogs, but they're not warm and cuddly. Okay, here's another church one. I belong to this big church that had 5,000 members, and there was a lot of clubs. It says the Little Mothers Club meets Tuesday night. Any woman in the church interested in becoming a little mother should see the pastor in his study. Okay, they just need to word those differently, more carefully. Okay? And of course the pastor at that church took a lot of kidding because somebody else had written that. Okay, now this is one of my favorites. And again, I'm going to talk about this tomorrow. I spent a lot of time working with kids to use what we call affirming language or build-up language. And one of the things that I did with them is that I gave them a simple assignment. It was a sheet of paper. Up at the top it said, affirmation assignment, verbal. And then it said, use your words to make someone feel good. And then what they were supposed to do is to pick 3 people that they appreciate, tell those 3 people why they appreciate them, and then listen for the response and write it down later. So what they did on the assignment, they put the name of the person, and then it says your relationship to this person, and they would explain friend or another teacher or something like that. And then it said what you said, and you would write down what you said, and then below that it said response. What was the response of the person? There is a copy of this in the book also. Okay, so the first part is, what did you say? Okay, now I had a student in 1998. His name was Tyrone, and he was a fabulous kid. He was a lot of fun. He was funny. Sometimes he was funny even when he wasn't trying to be funny. He was also a good student, and I just really liked him a lot. And so when he turned in the assignment, this is a time he's trying to do the assignment normally, but and he wasn't trying to be funny, but he came up with something funny. What did you say? This is what he wrote. I didn't say anything. My lips did all the work. Okay, now the person he had written was Serena, who was his girlfriend. Okay, what did you say? I didn't say anything. My lips did all the work. Okay, now you're supposed to write down what was the response. And here's his response. Hers were doing the same. Okay, now this assignment was worth 10 points. 3 points, 3 points, 3 points, and if I can read it, another point to even it off to 10 points. He did not get any points for this. He got a 7 on the assignment. Do you understand why he didn't get any points? Let me go back here. Oh, I forgot to, see what it says? Use your words to make someone feel good. It does not say use your lips. All right? So I wanted to have a little fun with Tyrone. And Tyrone came down the hallway the next day and he gave me a big hug, and I say, hey, Tyrone, I want to show you something. And I reached in and pulled out his paper and I showed him, and it had a 7 at the top instead of a 10. And then I wrote on that one, no points for being a lover. And he looked at it and he smiled and he says, oh, that's cold, Mr. Urban, that's cold. And I said, Tyrone, look. And I pointed on the paper where it says, use your words. And I said, follow my finger. And I went, it says, use your words. And he says, Mr. Urban, follow my finger. And he pointed and it said, make someone feel good. And he said, I made Serena feel good. Okay. Wrapping up. Good teachers catch their students doing things right. One of the things I learned when I was growing up, that my father was an expert at catching me doing things wrong. He wasn't very good at catching me doing things right. I wish he would have been better at that. It was his generation. And I also found out growing up that teachers almost always pointed out when I did something wrong, but they never did anything when I did right. The only time that would ever show up is on a report card. And we all need positive feedback. When we do well, we need to be affirmed about doing well. And so one of the things I learned when my first year of teaching is that the school that I taught at in my first year, they had a notice to send home to parents when kids did bad things. They did not have anything to send home when kids did good things. So I'm asking you, does your kid have a bad kid notice? Our notice was not called a bad kid notice, but that's what the kids called it. They called it a bad kid notice. They said, because you only get them when you're a bad kid. And I asked a kid one time, I said, what does the school send home when you do something good? And the answer was nothing. Well, I think we need to do both. So the question is, does your school have a good kid notice? Ours did not, so I made my own. Let me show it to you. This was a half sheet of paper. There's a reason why it's orange and black. Those were our school colors. So I did it on orange paper and black writing. And it says up at the top, you can probably see it, it says good kid notice. I write the student's name, the subject, the period, and then I write some comments about what the kid did that was great. And if I don't have enough room there, I'll turn it over and write it on the back, and then I date it because my name is on there. And I got some wonderful phone calls and letters from parents saying, my son has been at that school for 4 years, and this is the first time we've ever heard anything good that he's done, but we always hear everything he does bad. And I think we need to acknowledge that. Again, that's what affirming language is all about. Okay, we're now at the last chapter in the book. And this is, in some ways, this is the heart of my message. I read a book shortly after I got out of college. And it was written by a man that I had great respect for. His name was John W. Gardner. And he was a great leader in our country. And he won all kinds of awards because he did all kinds of fabulous things. And he wrote a book called Self-Renewal. And he said the key to a good life is always get better. He said, get better as a person, get better as a professional, get better as a family member. Always get better. It will make your life more interesting and challenging. And that book had a tremendous impact on me. And when I started teaching, and I started hearing these experienced teachers say they were all suffering from teacher burnout, and they said it happens to everybody, and I said, that's not ever going to happen to me. I said, I want to get better every year, and I want my last year in the classroom to be the best one that I've ever had. And I lived according to that principle. I did not ever want to burn out. And so my goal, like I say, every year was to be better the next year. And if I was still teaching today, I would still want to keep getting better. So I want to share with something very inspiring that I heard not too many years ago. Okay, this is just a profile of Dr. Gardner. And just to be brief about it so you have an idea of who he was. He died in 2002, not too long ago. He went to Stanford University, got his bachelor's and master's. He went to University of California in Berkeley, got his PhD, and his first love was teaching. And he went out and taught at a couple of schools, but then he became the head of one of the great foundations in the United States. Then he went into government and served as the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. He founded some wonderful organizations that made life better for a lot of people. He wrote a whole bunch of books. The one that I liked the best was the one in the middle there, Self-Renewal. The highest honor we give anybody in the United States is called the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He got that in 1964. And this is the most amazing thing about him. He was 77 years old, and Stanford University contacted him and said, John, how would you like to come back to Stanford and teach ethics in our School of Business? And he said, I would love to. And he went back there at age 77, and he taught until he was 89. Okay, I attended the last lecture that he ever gave. Stanford, as I mentioned before, is a couple miles from my school. And one of my students said, Mr. Urban, your hero is speaking in a free lecture at Stanford tonight. I was so glad he told me. So I went down to Stanford and I heard the lecture, and guess what it was on? It was on self-renewal. It was on that book and the principles, and he challenged everybody in there to become better all of the time. And I want to quote something that he said. I wrote it down because I was taking notes like crazy. And this is something that he said that night. He said, I took on a new teaching job at age 77, and I'm still learning, still trying to get better every year. He said that when he was 89, he died 3 months later. It was the most inspiring thing I have ever heard because it reaffirmed what I had read in his book, and it was so wonderful to hear this great man say that. And I hope that when I'm 89, I can say that I'm still working on getting better at whatever it is that I'm doing. To finish up, Marvin Berkowitz, a dear friend of mine who I dedicated this book to, he says the best teachers aim for perfection, but never expect it. We all know we'll never be perfect. But that's the reason they keep getting better, because they keep aiming for perfection. And I want to close with this one. What is character education? It's bringing out the best in our kids. You have been a fabulous audience. God bless you for what you do. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I will see you tomorrow.